Welcome to In Conversation with Brad Wendes. Here I am, Brad Wendes, and today I've got a slightly different episode for you. We've been running now for 12 weeks on this YouTube channel from fresh with no existing audience. I'm just looking at my stats here. We've got 93 videos up, so I've been doing daily uploads as well as the weekly long form conversations. We've had 35,000 views in the last 12 weeks and 62 subscribers that have come on. So thank you to all of you who've come on board. And if you're not subscribed, don't forget to like and subscribe. I apparently have to say that every single episode. So I just want to reflect on the last 12 weeks and the guests and just work out kind of what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong, and give you guys and aspiring podcasters a kind of tips and advice and all of the pitfalls that we've made. I said from the start that I wanted to help people not make the same mistakes as we've made, which is why we're talking to successful people or people that have got interesting lives so that you can hopefully go and do some of that yourself. But even in this little experiment in the last 12 weeks, I've made a whole bunch of mistakes. So I just wanted to look at some of those things and give a little bit of background, particularly for those new people that have come into the podcast and like, who is this guy? Why is he chatting to his friends on the podcast? What's the point? Give you a little bit of context on why I started and what it's all about. So here we are. This episode is revisiting some of the previous podcasts and talking about why those interviews were good, why they were bad, some of the technical aspects, and just go through what it is to have been a podcaster for 3 months and got 35,000 views, which is amazing. Thank you so much to everyone who's watched, liked, subscribed, all of those things. Okay, so I'm going to start off with the first conversation we had, which was Alex Tucker. And I can't complain about Alex. It was a great conversation. But you might have noticed at the beginning of this one, the intro is done from here, from in my office, as you can see right there. Whereas the conversation was done in the studio. And the reason for that is because I didn't take my time. I didn't take care at the very beginning. You'll notice there's no close-up shots of me in that entire podcast because my camera was completely out of focus. I sat down, I got myself on the mic and I said, "Oh, Alex, could you just half press that shutter button?" Whereas the focus point was off on the background somewhere. So I've got over an hour of footage that just was completely unusable. So I used the wide shot, which was on the DJI Action 4. So it's quite a nice like action camera, but it's not DSLR. It's not a crisp, clean image. So for my first one, I was a bit disappointed at that. But what I should have done is said, "Oh, Alex, would you mind sitting over there? I'm just going to get focused and then get started." But yeah, that was a bad one on me. But we'll go through the start and you can have a look. My first guest is someone that I'm really excited to talk to. Someone from an absolutely working class background in Basildon who ended up touring the world with a massive musical theatre production and even spent some time as a stripper. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Alex Tucker. Alex, tell us about yourself. Hi.
First of all, thanks, Brad.
And there we are, straight into that wide shot because I couldn't use any of the shots of me. Fortunately, Alex's camera, which I did focus, was fine. Now, Alex was a great one because he's an old friend. He's someone who works with me and he's a great talker. He's got some interesting stories. But I really had to cut it around. Like, it took me all week to edit that video and it's quite heavily cut. If you watch the video on YouTube rather than listening to the podcast, you can see it's cut. There's lots of umming and ahhing. And I kind of hadn't found my groove yet in terms of interviewing and finding out how the best way of speaking to people is. And I think Alex was actually quite nervous. For a confident guy, he was quite nervous at the prospect of simply being interviewed one-on-one and talking about himself. So fantastic conversation. Go check it out. And I'm just going to have a look at what we did next. What was our very next conversation? So next up, we got Gary Turner. And Gary really reiterated some of the things that Alex had spoken about, which was that people who excel in their field tend to find a sense of belonging. It's all well and good wanting to be good at something, but if you're the outsider, if you don't have a love of not just doing that thing, but feeling like you belong in that thing, in that clique, in that tribe, it's not always going to go well. Obviously, there are outliers to that, but we're looking at how Gary found a sense of belonging in the drama club and loved it and went on to RADA and went on to become a successful actor who's a successful working actor now. So a little bit on Gary and how he first found that drama club.
The reason I lay that background is then I went to drama club and all of a sudden nobody cared whether I had a club foot or whether I was overweight or whatever. And we were all it was like where the misfits went.
And I like that. I like that Gary talks about the misfits because I think that's something that we get a lot certainly in my place of work. We get a lot of people that don't necessarily feel like they belong anywhere else. And I know that was kind of me. I moved around a lot. I moved from school to school as a kid. And I finally found my groove when I joined a gymnastic team in my secondary school, which was the Blue Falcons gymnastics display team. Sadly disbanded last year. And I found people that I would regard as, close friends and people I might not see all the time, but God, that was my family growing up. And that gave me the skill set that I've got to get into the performance work and get into having the career that I've got. In fact, Will Richards, who was one of our later guests, was also in the team, as was his older brother, Ollie. And those are guys that I would still consider friends. I don't see them very often, but we spent years together and like 3 nights a week and traveling around the country in the summer in minibuses and things. You can't put a value on spending that much time with each other. You know each other inside out. And we did have each other's backs and we'd squabble but it was a team. And anyone who's been involved in team sports has probably experienced something similar. It does feel like a family. I know it's an overused expression, but it really does feel like you are one big family. Next up, we've got Richard Bland. Now, I'm sure a lot of people won't have heard of Richard Bland because he's quite a local guy and he's still forging his own career. Shot in the studio, shot in person. And I've got a lot of time for Richard. Richard's a really passionate director. He's studied and he cares and he's really honed his craft and he's running some amazing acting classes. And I've got to say, I've attended some of his classes because it's a really good experience. And we're talking about that belonging, that feeling, that sense of being part of a tribe. Richard's adult acting class really do feel like a bunch of friends. And I went a couple of times and immediately I just felt so relaxed and at ease around these people and I'm enjoying the activity. And creating those kind of communities and creating that safe, comfortable place for people is an amazing skill to have. And I like to think that we've done that here at my academy. I'll probably talk a little bit more about that later. But Richard's really carved something special out. Adult acting in North Essex. He's also up in Suffolk, and he's actually starting one here at my academy on a Friday night because I just think it's such an amazing, I want to say product, but it's not a product. It's a community. It's an activity. People are learning and getting his knowledge and putting on their own pieces of theatre and honing their craft, but also just feeling like they've got somewhere to be. And we're going to get onto that later on because Jamie, who was on last week, really spoke very eloquently about that safe space to be in, that third space. So here's a little bit from Richard.
So recently you started doing some acting classes and they've been really successful. And from people within and people without, I hear Richard's acting classes are brilliant. People are enjoying it. People are getting some benefit out of it. Therefore, you've grown your community. And not that I would suggest that is your... you're not looking to monetize said community, but you've got a group of people who trust you because you're delivering a great product to them. They're enjoying, they feel safe, they feel part of something. If you started making wax melts on Etsy, you've got a whole bunch of people that would buy them. Now, that's not the monetization I suggest, but that's what you really have to build. You want a community and you want authenticity and you want people to trust you. And then if you discover something really cool, like, oh, let's go on an acting retreat to this awesome place in France. Let's go there. They'll go, yeah, actually, well, Richard knows what he's talking about. I would really enjoy a £1,000 weekend in France to do an acting course. Whereas if you just put an advert online... Okay,
we're getting on there to like the commercial side of things. And that is something that people do aspire to do. People want to build a community and monetize that community. And we spoke about creating an authentic community and having an authentic presence and offering value to your followers. And then you can start selling them things that are of value. And I made the joke about wax melts on Etsy, but I see that a lot where someone... I mean, the worst example of that, in my opinion, is someone who has no discernible skill other than perhaps being aesthetically pleasing and taking provocative, suggestive photographs and videos of themselves and then trying to sell that increasing market some product that is of no benefit to them whatsoever. And yeah, they'll make a little bit of money, but it just doesn't feel very authentic to me. Someone like Richard, who's got a great acting class, if there were an additional bolt-on class or some sort of additional training or one-to-ones where he can add further benefit to them. He's got an audience he can market that to, but he's selling them something that's of value to them. So everyone wins because obviously he's going to monetize this product that he's selling, but also the people that are buying it are getting something of genuine value. They're not just buying something off the girl on Instagram in booty shorts, but that's another matter. Now, onto the logistics of the podcast. You see the studio there. I was shooting in the basement of a bar, so we had to shoot in the mornings before the place opened, which is fine. Yeah, I don't mind doing that. Shout out to Charlie at Three Wise Monkeys. Thank you so much for letting us use the space. It's a beautiful space. It's there like 20 style speakeasy downstairs, lovely big sofas. Get the place to myself. And we've got that like lovely corrugated metal backdrop and then the wooden backdrop. What I would say on that is when I was setting up, I didn't really know anything about sound. I've got this microphone here. I've actually got my pop filter on it today because I know that I'm going to be quite close to it because there's people in this building. So I've adjusted the sensitivity and moved myself very close to it. I can get really close and do the ASMR voice. For those that want to go to sleep to this podcast, you can go to sleep now. And I'm starting to learn about how sound works. What I didn't do in any of those earlier ones was consider the spill from one mic to another. So I had the mic set at a reasonable level. I test the levels. I'm recording straight into the laptop, so I'm recording two separate channels of audio. But we were way too close to each other, way too close. So when I'm editing it, I'm having to trim his audio track because I'm spilling over into it, and then I'm trimming mine a little bit, and I'm having to adjust the level. And it took a long time. So what I started to learn to do, and looking at other podcasts and looking at endless YouTube videos on how to record sound, how to edit sound, moving us a little bit further away, moving the microphone closer to our faces. So when people are doing this, it doesn't sound quite as bad. But we want to be nice and close to the microphone so we don't get a lot of spill from what else is going on. And having those two separate audio tracks, I can simply then look at the peaks. So I know that when there's a peak on that channel, then the host is speaking. When there's a peak on that channel, the guest is speaking, and it makes running through the edit so much easier, especially when I'm using multicam. I can just be looking at the timeline in Premiere Pro, which is what I edit in, and going straight into, okay, well, that's where I'm speaking, so that's probably where the cut's going to be. Do I want a wide or do I want a shot on me? And it's so easy visually just to go, there's going to be a cut there, there's going to be a cut there, there's going to be a cut there. And now I can pretty much run through my my podcast and watch it once. So it's not going to take an hour because you have to do some cuts and make some changes. But pretty much once I've got it all on the timeline, I'm watching it through once, making those cuts as I go. I'm not using the multicam feature on Premiere Pro because I kind of like the workflow I've got, but you can do multicam in Premiere Pro. Once you've synced up the audio, you can just choose by tapping 1, 2, and 3 which camera you want to use. But I've done it manually with the blade tool. And I might at some point make a video of my process and how I do it, because I think I've got it down quite quickly now. I've got the title and I've got the end. And I've got all of the overlays all set, so I can just drop the new footage in, trim, and do it. And yeah, I think I've got the hang of it. Which brings me on to the next one, which is John Hedge Hall, which was the first remote interview that I did. So the first remote podcast using Riverside FM. I love Riverside. I'm actually recording this straight into Riverside because I can do the screen share. And I like it. I send him a link. He dials in. We've got a remote studio. But what I didn't account for with this one was he's shooting on a laptop using a microphone that I've got no real control over. I've got a little bit of control over his levels. So if we just have a look at Hedge briefly. Now, John Hedge Hall here. There he is. Quality is not great, is it? Looking at that compared with this, and I'll talk about camera setup in a minute, but it's not great. So he's 720 blown up to 720p. I got 1080 on here, and it just looks crisp. I've got probably a better light setup. I've got the LEDs in the background. I've got the nice big lamp up here. His mic is set up there as someone who's got a little bit more of an echo, and that was a learning experience. So I think Riverside is brilliant. It's a great platform. I've had a few quirks and problems with it, but I haven't lost any data from it. And the magic clips that it produces, which I'm using for my daily videos, perfect. I can't complain about them at all. I've had to do a little bit of editing here and there. The transcription's pretty good, considering I've got people with various accents saying quite interesting words. So Riverside FM, again, I might do a little run through of how I use that and what I use it for at some point. But for now, this was done remotely in the Riverside studio. And I think it's easier, personally. I love doing the in-person interviews because sitting across from someone and having a chat with them is really authentic and it's great. But then I've got 3 cameras, 2 streams of audio. I've got to edit it all, which, as I said, I've streamlined now. But in Riverside, it just dumps it all on the cloud. I can download it. I know that the audio is already synced up. I know that the video is already synced up. It's making my cutting a little bit easier. It is more straightforward, and the file management on Riverside is great. The transcription is pretty good, but the magic clips that it produces for the daily shorts is just spot on. You click a button and it does AI magic clips. Comes out with videos which are already 9:16, so they're already in portrait mode. And yeah, I can't complain. A minute long of an interesting piece of conversation. It's great. So Riverside, big props to them. I know there's other platforms, but Riverside's great. Hedge is also talking about finding his tribe, that he started as an academic and then went on to kind of finding parkour and dropped out of science and his PhD in favor of parkour, which I can attest to is not very well paying. But he loved it and doing something he loves and getting very good at what he loves. And that was the coaching of parkour rather than the practicing of parkour. He's a good mover, but he's an excellent coach. So let's hear a bit about what Hedge's got to say.
And as I was doing my PhD, I was also teaching kids parkour, and I was terrible at it. Brad, I was rubbish. I didn't know what I was doing. I had no idea. I was working with a guy called Stuart Wilson from Fife Parkour Coaching, and he had no idea what he was doing either, but he was just doing it anyway. And I was so bad at it, so I was determined to get better at it. And the evolution in my practice over the course of those 5 years, I went from someone who did not know what he was doing to someone who was a fairly decent teacher, because I just wanted to get better at it. And I took parkour and I applied it to parkour coaching. And actually there, I have more pretty good influences. So I had a lot of
Okay, he goes on to talk about some of his influences there, people that he was spending a lot of time with up in Scotland. But really the key take home there was he wasn't enjoying academia, which is what he'd set out to do, and then found his tribe in parkour, and he could apply the practices of parkour, which is overcoming obstacles and trying to better yourself, to the coaching of parkour, which he attests to there not being very good at. And I think we're all rubbish when we first start out. And I'm looking at this podcast and the early videos, I'm looking at the quality of the sound and I'm looking at the quality of the editing. I'm like, oh, I do that differently now. But I would hope that they get better as they go on, and the sound quality is going to improve. My ability to talk to the camera is going to improve. In fact, I think as I warm up, I get better in the episode. I start off quite wooden because it's very weird sitting alone in a room talking to a camera. I'm looking at the screen. I've got a couple of screens here, but realistically, I'm sitting here in a room talking to myself. And you guys need to believe that I'm talking to you. I need to be authentic. I need to be relaxed. I need to be me. And you need to be able to see my personality. It's quite hard to do that without having a real person there, which is why I think I like the in-person conversation. And just doing the intros and right now being alone in a room is weird. And setting myself out to do a weekly long-form video, that's hard. It's not just hard for me because I've got to come up with the content. I've got to record the thing and I've got to then edit the thing and upload it. It needs to be engaging. It needs to be interesting. But it's also asking a lot of you guys. I'm looking at the views now. It's over 200 views on some of them. Oddly, getting far better views on the long form stuff on YouTube than I am on Spotify. Spotify, there's a couple that are over 100, but for the most part, it's sort of double digits people that have listened to all the way through, whereas on YouTube, people are listening more, watching more of it, which is unusual for a podcast because normally people put it on the background, especially the long form stuff. Getting lots of views on the shorts, which I would expect, they're 20 seconds to 60 seconds long, and it's also the most interesting bits of the conversation. So I've had my highest viewed video in the last month has been 7,000 views, which was a short of Chris Phillips. And I've learned a little bit about what I believe the YouTube algorithm to be about. And I'm no expert on this, but just looking at my own data and looking at what's going on, most of my shorts get about 400 views. And I think that's the sample that YouTube puts it out to. So it'll push out this short to 400 people in the first 24 hours. And if they engage with it, if any of those people like it and comment, then it starts to snowball out to like Chris Phillips getting 1,000. There's a few that are on 2K. There's a couple, I think there's one on 4K. But for the most part, 400 or 500 views is what the shorts get. I'm happy with that. I'm a new YouTuber. There's a couple that have got absolutely no views at all. And I know people say, well, you can't blame the algorithm, but there's one video where Chris Phillips is saying negative things about YouTube. That video got no views. And when I say none, I mean it got like 7 views in the first week, and half of them were probably me going, why is no one watching this video? And it was just as engaging and interesting as the other stuff, but it didn't get pushed to anyone. So I think you've got to be careful about what you say, particularly when there's transcriptions over it, so you've got text in there. I'll be interested to see how I've got some fairly emotive subjects coming out of some of the videos of Jamie. I'll be interested to see how they perform, because we're talking about things like politics and finances and mental health, emotional well-being, and illness, talking about leukemia, talking about cancer. I'll be interested to see how they perform. But I'm starting to get a handle on it. And I think if people bite in that first 24 hours or so, then it snowballs. I say my highest view video, 7,000 views. Most of them are averaging 400 or 500 views, with some of them in like single or barely in double digits. So it's been really interesting. So my next guest was Jacob from Jacob's Toys. Now, Jacob's someone I've known for a long time. He's actually married to someone I went to school with. And I didn't know kind of what we were going to chat about too much, because I wanted to talk to him about being a creator, and I wanted to talk to him about his YouTube channel and the Instagram that's blown up. And then we kind of went off on a tangent and started talking about pop culture. And that's when both of us, I think, were more relaxed, because that's where we were at. Jacob's quite a humble guy. He doesn't want to talk about being super successful. And I think having, 10 to 20,000 subscribers on a social media platform does require a bit of work, and you should be proud of yourself on that. And he's talking about authenticity and being very humble. So I didn't want to press him too hard to kind of blow his own trumpet, because that's not the kind of guy he is. But when we're talking about like our theories on Marvel movies and what our feelings are on the cinema and pop culture in general, I think we're both on kind of a similar page and talking about the death of the blockbuster video, and we started to touch upon the death of the shared experience, which Jamie and I spoke about as well, where you don't have the water cooler talk anymore. You don't go into school and say, hey, did you see that thing last night? Because everyone watched that thing that was on last night. Or when things come out every week, some people might watch a Netflix show every week when it comes out, but a lot of people are going to wait or binge it, or they're already watching another series. We're not watching at the same time. Like, you could text or phone your friend at the end of an episode of something, knowing they just watched it exactly the same time as you, because we're watching it on TV rather than a streaming service. Or you'd go and look at the back of movie boxes in Blockbuster Video and pick the one you wanted based on just what the packet looked like, or maybe a trailer you'd seen. That's not really the kind of thing you do anymore, because we have so much choice. We're not all watching the same things. And I think that's, putting people into slightly smaller niches, because you'll watch that thing you're interested in, I'll watch this thing I'm interested in. The niches get smaller and smaller and smaller, which is something Dave spoke about. Instead of all of us watching this one technology program, you've now got like Apple fans and Android fans and Mac fans and Windows fans and gamers and all these tiny little niches, because you can go into the absolute minutiae of the thing you're interested in just on YouTube, let alone streaming services that we've got entertainment on. So here's a little excerpt from a conversation with Jacob when we're talking about his success in streaming. So I've seen your photos. I think your toy photography is brilliant. I really, really like it. I like the way it looks. I like the style. And it got me interested in looking into toy photography, like other people's stuff. Mm-hmm. But I think you've underplayed it there, because like getting over 10K followers on a social media platform is a bit of work. It's not something that, unless you're a girl in booty shorts doing squats, you're going to struggle to kind of crack that 10K. I mean, maybe I'll try that in future. But in fact, I think I did
try that, but I went down that route, but it didn't take off for me at all. It didn't take off.
Yeah. No one signed up to my OnlyFans. I got no hope there at all. But no. So what kind of things do you think you did? No OnlyFans. What kind of things do you think you did that stuck out, that made your channel? Or your all right, it goes off on a bit of a tangent there, and I know there's me ragging on people that get a lot of views in booty shorts now. Now I'm just jealous because no one's going to sign up to my OnlyFans. I wasn't blessed with the right aesthetic for that. But you can see that Jacob's a humble guy there. Like he's dodging the question where I'm trying to compliment him and talk about how he got that success, and he's kind of just diverting, because I don't think he wants to be the bragger. He doesn't want to have the bravado and go, I'm the big YouTube guy, and there are much bigger people out there. I'm really, really, really happy with the success that this channel has had. 35,000 views in 3 months from nothing, when I'm a relative unknown talking to people who are also relatively unknown. Thank you, guys. And I'm looking at what I can do to make it more successful, because I haven't got any subscribers. I've only got 62 subscribers, which on the worst case scenario suggests that people are watching it and going, I'm not watching that again. So is the content not very good? So let me know down in the comments, or let me know, drop me a message. I'm Brad Wendes on Instagram, and I've now got a Facebook like business page rather than just my personal one, or X, Twitter, YouTube, whatever. Let me know what you think could be done to make this more engaging, to make it more interesting. What else do you want to see? What kind of guests do you want? Let me know, because you guys are watching it. This belongs to you as much as it does me. Okay. Moving on to Chris Phillips. Now, Chris Phillips was another remote one. He lives in Boise, Idaho. He's a local guy that moved out there. I haven't seen him much in a few years because he's been out living in Idaho. Quality's fairly good. I'm quite happy with the quality because he's a filmmaker in a studio, so he's fairly well lit. Sounds good. He's got a little lav mic on. But the conversation did not go the way I was expecting. I thought we'd talk about, pop culture, and I thought we'd talk about just being the age we are. And I wanted to talk to him about working for MTV and being a filmmaker and being a creator and the creative side of things, which is really where I've been at with this, talking to people that create entertainment and create content. And we ended up talking about, some of the really toxic sides of the world when we were growing up, talking about the way that the world's moved on a lot more, and the way that guys used to behave around girls, which is just inappropriate now. Talking about how socially acceptable it was for much older guys to be dating much younger girls, which now is frowned upon, and protection of young people is much, much more important. And it was interesting. It was fascinating. I've had people say to me that was a really interesting conversation, but it was not the conversation that I set out to have. So as an interviewer, I'm having to learn how I can, improvise a little bit and kind of let him talk about interesting things. And the questions that I had prepared were not in that direction at all. And then also rein him back in, so we're not going off on a big rant. Like, there was some political talk, particularly US politics, which wasn't really what I wanted to get into, not in this conversation anyway. So let's just have a little bit of Chris Phillips, and you can see what I mean on this one.
I'm bringing this up is because the culture of that, you can see how this could get a little bit out of hand. If you're an arsehole millionaire and you don't have a bit of local fame, you have national fame,
Proper fame.
and you're not 25 with an 18-year-old girlfriend or 22 with a 16-year-old girlfriend. You are 40, right? With going to nightclubs with 17-year-olds.
So yeah, Chris is talking there about some of the really toxic sides of being in the late 90s, early 2000s, particularly in the area that we live, which is in Essex and southeast of the UK. And it was interesting. He could give some stories from his time working at MTV back in that time about how some of the people were wonderful and some of the people were not. But one of the more interesting things he spoke about that I hadn't even considered was that Chris was working there in the advent of kind of technology getting smaller. And one of the most fascinating things and stories he gave, and go listen to the whole thing, but he was talking about editing video on a laptop, just sitting upstairs in a room, in an office, which 20 years ago was probably unheard of, because you had these massive editing suites, which you can still get, and people still use editing suites, but he could edit content that was good enough for broadcast on a laptop. And when the bigwigs get hold of that, they realize they don't need this editing suite and to buy lunches for people and to have all of this space and all of this very, very expensive kit for the quality of some of the shows they wanted to put out. I mean, I'm filming this, and I think the quality is great on a really cheap LED lamp up here, $100 microphone, and my phone. Something that we talk about. I use continuity camera on my iPhone. That's what I'm filming this on, in my office at work, with a $20 strip, £20 strip of blue LED lights behind me. This is not an expensive studio. It's not an expensive setup. It looks all right. The quality is great. Run this through a sound editing piece of software, and it's going to sound pretty good too. I hope. Let me know if my sound editing needs something to be desired. So Chris was there at the advent of that technology, and when the bean counters found out that you could edit on a laptop, suddenly they don't need all these big studios, not for every production, and certainly not for kind of editing and chopping stuff up after the fact. So he probably got very well regarded and very, very well recognized for saving them some budget. Really, really interesting, and something I hadn't considered. And then we talk about Boglins and Doctor Who and things, which was great. My next guest is someone I spoke about earlier, Will Richards. Will Richards was in my gymnastic team. He's quite a bit younger than me, and his older brother's a few years younger than me as well. Will's a great presenter, and he's made a career out of talking. And he speaks about not being particularly academic. He's a smart guy, street smart, but he's a smart guy. And he made a career out of being an MC and presenting, and being something of a comedian. He gets a lot of that from his dad. His dad's a really funny guy. Mum's also a really competent performer. Used to dance a lot, singer, actress. not professional. It was hobbyists, but there's nothing to say that they couldn't have pursued it. And his dad does run a professional theatre company as well. So he kind of grew up around that. And something I notice even these days, the people that do things are the people that do things. Now, I'll explain what I mean by that. When you're involved in community activities, so we're arranging the local carnival around here, you see the same faces. You go to a community meeting about something, it'll be the same people that are at a community meeting about the other thing. In my experience, the people that get involved in things are the key people that get involved in things. People that do things are the people that do things. So when I was involved in the gymnastic team, and I've got Will and his brother Ollie who are doing that, then you get involved in the youth theatre. Oh no, would you look at that? It's Will and Ollie and Will's mum and Will's dad. Because the people that do things are the people that do things. And they get involved in lots of things. And those kids that we'd see in the sports clubs and in the drama shows and in the drama clubs are the kids that are driven, motivated to do things. And I like to think that a lot of them went on to be successful, perhaps not in those fields, but they were the kids who were encouraged to do things that felt a sense of belonging and felt like they could be somewhere. And then you've got the kids that feel like they don't belong, and that's when things can go really wrong. You know, when people feel isolated and alienated, and they might find, particularly these days, online, a really negative echo chamber of people that also don't feel like they belong, and that's when we get a build-up of anger and really negative outlets, which we see in the news all the time. Really not what we want to see. So anyway, on to Will Richards. This was another one back in the studio. The mics were a little bit further away. I've also got a boom arm on both of us for this one. It was the first time I used the boom arm in person. I think it worked a bit better. I put the boom arm on the camera side of us simply because of the length of the cables I had, whereas on the wide shot now, the cameras are like in our faces, so you can't always see them. So that was a lesson learned there. I was also massively anxious about the sound on this one because I knew Will was a busy guy and he had places to go. So I set it all up and I did a little sound check and then just hit record and we started chatting. And about 10 minutes in, I'm kind of glancing over at my laptop, looking at the levels and thinking, oh, are these peaking? Are they too quiet? Like, where are we at? Fortunately, it was okay, but I didn't double check. And we could have got an hour in and not had any audio. It could have been a real mess. So absolutely, I know I keep saying it. If I'm rushing, I'm making mistakes. So take your time. If you're setting up a podcast, if you're setting up interviews, take your time, check the focus, check the levels, because otherwise you're going to have this amazing conversation and you're not going to be able to use it. And you can't get him back in and have the same conversation again because it's just not going to be real. So take your time. Okay, over to Mr. Will Richards. Let's see what he's got to say. This is about how he started out. And he was working in a bar and he just took this opportunity.
Asking for photos with him. I always used to look after him because he was a nice guy and let him queue jump and all that sort of stuff. And I said, why are they taking photos with you? And he explained who he was. And then I was like, fantastic, this is brilliant. He goes, by the way, you're a funny guy. If ever you want to do anything like this, let me know and I'll try and put you in contact with the right people. Fast forward about 6 months later, there's a company called the Wall of Comedy. They're looking to film in a bar in Essex with a guy called Philly, young Philly. And they're looking to film a series or a pilot for a BBC series, I think it was. And Nathan then said, oh, I know the Wall of Comedy and I know Will from Citizen in Essex. So put two and two together. They came down and filmed. They asked if I'd help them out and do some shots with them. And they said on the day, I remember so well, nobody's ever matched Philly or sort of, not outdone Philly, but with the energy that he's got, because he's such an energetic guy. No one's ever matched that or gone above and beyond, especially with wit and comedy and that sort of thing. So we'd love to work with you again in the future. Sounds great to me. And then fast forward a few months again, I signed a contract with him for a few years and started doing the videos that very gratefully went viral.
Okay, so there you go. We were talking about the very beginnings of his career there, and he was just the guy working in a bar, looking after people, looking after this guy because he was a nice guy. Turns out he's a famous actor and opened doors, made connections. I was fortunate enough to be interviewed by Will recently for his podcast, The Dash, which is going to come out soon. I will obviously spam social media when it does come out. And we spoke about opportunities. And opportunity, they're everywhere. Opportunities are everywhere. And I was listening to someone else on an Instagram reel recently. And I don't know if this is a well-known story. It might be a really popular story, but I'm going to relay it now. It's Sam Parham was the one that was talking about it. And talking about opportunity. And he asked the question, he says, how many red cars did you see on the way to work this morning? I have no idea how many red cars I saw on the way to it because I wasn't paying attention to red cars. Some, I imagine. Well, if you think about counting the red cars on the way home and you're looking for them, when you get home, you'll know how many red cars you saw. Yeah, well, that makes sense. The same is true of opportunity. If you're just going through life doing your thing and you're blinkered and you're not looking for these opportunities, then you're not going to see them because you're not looking for them, and they'll be there every day. There'll be opportunities. So if you're actively looking for opportunities to do the thing you want to do, or looking for opportunities to connect and collaborate, or whatever it is you're trying to achieve, maybe work, it might be personal, whatever it is, looking for those opportunities and taking those opportunities, just follow up, return that email, return that call, continue that conversation. When someone's asking about what you do for a living, just have the conversation, have a chat. If someone gives you their card, drop them an email, drop them a text. If one of your friends says, do you want to go out for a drink, and you can, then do it. Keep those connections alive. So looking for opportunities. And that might sound like, well, how do I know even what an opportunity is? But if you're aware that you're looking for those opportunities, they'll be there. And that's the thing with Will. He was a nice guy looking after someone in a bar, and the next thing you know, that person has made a connection, and now Will is running podcasts and running like a digital Yellow Pages, and he is a full-time presenter from someone who wasn't very academic, who was working in a bar, to being full-time successful presenter and character. A lot of that has to do with the kind of person that he is, but he didn't need to. Someone says, oh, do you want to do some filming for this pilot? He could have gone, oh no, I'm too busy. And he'd probably still be working on that bar. In fact, he wouldn't, because that bar's closed down now. Before we move on to the next guest, just a little bit about the setup we've got here. I spoke about it earlier. So I've got my LED strip lights. I've got the Rode pod mic, great camera. Rode pod mic, which is a great microphone. I've actually got it covered up. I just wanted the pop filter on it because I know that I'm going to be very close to it today. I've got my boom arm, which was the cheapest boom arm on Amazon. Scarlett 2i2 USB-C input to the MacBook, which is right in front of me. iPhone 15 Pro up there, and a cheap LED panel up here. This is my office. I've been using continuity camera. Now, continuity camera is where your iPhone camera can connect wirelessly to your Mac. So if you're using a Mac product, whether it be a desktop Mac or a MacBook, you can connect wirelessly. So there's no cables at all. My phone's just there on a tripod. And I had some trouble with this in a couple of the episodes. Particularly iCave Dave and Jake. I couldn't get it to connect, and I was like bang in my head. So I ended up having to use, for some of those, I had to use the webcam on my MacBook, which is a 1080 webcam. It's a nice camera, but you notice the quality is not quite as good as when I'm shooting with something like this, the iPhone 15, which is a great camera. So for those that are using continuity camera, I got some advice for you here, because it took me a while to work this out. Your phone has to be screen off, I locked. It has to be in the horizontal orientation and fairly still. So it's either resting on your desk or as I've got it on a tripod. But it has to be in that position before you open Chrome. So you can go into Chrome and you can get it to recognize it, and you can get it to have the camera. If you've got your camera in your hand, when you open Chrome, game over. So where I was using my phone to I was texting Dave to say, oh, I'm just logging in now. Open up Chrome, gone to Riverside, and then put my camera in the holster, it would not connect, because it has to be in that position when you open Chrome. So if you're having problems with continuity camera, leave your phone alone, which I know is an issue in the 21st century. So phone in the holster, then open Chrome. Even recording this, I've got all of my tabs open for all of the videos that I want to show you guys. And then I realized I got my phone in my hand. So I had to close all of my tabs, shut down Chrome, put it into its holster, then open it all up, go into Riverside and start using it. So put it in the magic position, horizontal, screen locked, and then open Chrome. In Safari, it's not so bad. And if you're using just recording through your Mac in something like QuickTime, not the end of the world. But Chrome, it'll look for the camera when it boots up, and it won't look for it again after that. So you cannot connect if it's not in the right position before you've opened Chrome. There's some tips for you. And Riverside only works in Chrome, or possibly Edge, but I'm using Chrome. My next guest, another unexpected one. This was the first guest that I didn't know, someone I had no idea who they were. And this was Crystal Moore. Crystal Moore is an American comedian. She's the partner of Chris Phillips, who was one of the earlier guests. And I watched some of Crystal's stuff, and she's quite outspoken, quite a feminist. And I was thinking, like I said to her before the thing, I was like, I watched some of your comedy, and I appreciate I'm not the target audience. And as we were chatting, I was like, well, actually, maybe I am, because I've got a daughter. I kind of want the world to be fair, and I want the world to be a better place for women, because I don't want anything bad to ever happen to my little girl. So as a girl dad, I kind of understand the need for places to be safe for women. I can't understand what it is to be a woman, but I've got an understanding at least of wanting to recognize the dangers that women face, and any unfairnesses women face, because ain't nobody messing with my little girl. So we were chatting, and I thought we might talk about her becoming a creator and how she got into comedy. And again, it went off in a different direction, and we ended up talking quite a lot about religion and her background, and talking about US politics. I'm really interested in US politics because we look at it from over here in the United Kingdom, and we try and like draw similes, but the way the politics work in the States is so different to over here. You've got to kind of completely reframe your thinking of how the political system works. Now ours is not great, it's archaic. The United States is just very different, and I often say the same thing. If they didn't speak English, we wouldn't feel so much of an affinity with them, but we do. So we look at them as our closest neighbor, or a country that's the most similar to us, and they're just not. They're really not. There's European countries that have probably got far more similar governance to us. Okay, so looking at Crystal Moore, and some of these tangents we went off on were just absolutely fascinating stuff.
Like, where am I going to learn how to tell jokes in Weiser, Idaho? Like, where am I even going to tell these jokes? At the class reunion? Fuck off. I don't think so. No, like, so, yeah, you can't. None of that stuff was there. So we didn't necessarily have that. I certainly had those, like, daydream. I would call them more daydreams and hopes than, like, a goal to do something theatrical or perform in some way or be artistic or whatever. Like, these are.
So Crystal Moore then, just very seriously talking about some of the struggles she faced in her life. I've just realized I was wearing the same jumper in that as I am today. So I apologize if it's just double vision for me. For those that are watching this, if you're listening to this, I'm wearing a mustard colored hoodie, and I love it. Something that Crystal did speak quite a bit about was religion, and that wasn't something I was particularly prepared for, because I'm not a religious person. I've got views and beliefs on religion and organized religion. And we had a really interesting conversation because she was raised Mormon, so talking about the Mormonism, and I didn't understand some of the aspects of her humor which relate to Mormonism, because I don't understand Mormonism. So even like the name of her show being Jack Mormon Hour, and I didn't know that the expression Jack Mormon means that you're not a good Mormon. So I'm like, oh, now that makes sense. Now that's funny. So it was an eye-opening one for me, and it was nice to speak to someone who grew up in the United States, and particularly was raised Mormon, and then became a Christian, and then kind of swayed away from Christianity, and then went into comedy, obviously. So it was a really interesting conversation, and Crystal was like just the most lovely person. She is so sweet, and she like really cares about her family, and she's just absolutely brilliant. There's a little bit of bravado there, and some of the social media posts she put out after the interview, particularly to like advertise the podcast, I was like, oh, did I upset her as a straight white guy talking to her? I don't want to patronize her. And she messaged me, and she's like, look, that's just part of the shtick. That's part of the character. Really enjoyed coming on the show, and I get that, and I respect that, and that's not to say she's inauthentic at all. She firmly believes everything she talks about, but sometimes you've got to be a little bit larger than life. But she was just the most lovely person to spend an hour talking to, and it made me feel a bit more comfortable about talking to strangers. So some of the guests that I want to get on are going to be people from outside of my immediate circle, and so it gave me the confidence to interview someone that I didn't know a huge amount about. Then we're on to our next guest, which was iCave Dave. Now, this one I was looking forward to. Dave is a YouTuber. He's got 12,500 subscribers on YouTube. He's a tech YouTuber, so he talks about particularly Apple news. He's a guy who's a similar age to me that turned out was from a very similar part of the country to me. He's a father. He's got a full-time job as well. So it was really interesting to get him on, because I watched Dave's show, and I've watched Dave's show for a couple of years. So for him to be on the screen in front of me was like normal. It's just Dave. I watch Dave on YouTube all the time, but he'd never communicate with me. So I felt that like sense of ease and felt relaxed talking to him, because he's someone that I am familiar listening to. But but it would have been maybe jarring for him for me to be like really overly familiar because I know all about him and he doesn't even know how to pronounce my surname, which is Wendes, by the way, Brad Wendes. This was also the one where I had the problem with the continuity camera. So this was filmed using the webcam, and Dave is using continuity camera on his iPhone 14. So you can see the stark difference in quality in a moment. But something we spoke about with Dave, we went into some fairly deep stuff. Now, again, talking as someone that he doesn't know me, we were just chatting on a podcast, but we were talking about his son's illness and my father's cancer, and it wasn't a direction I expected to go in with a YouTuber, like a tech YouTuber. But I didn't want to just talk about tech because that's his thing, and I went on his podcast and talked about tech, and I wanted to learn about Dave, and that's what this is about. It's about getting to know people. It's about talking to people. So here's a little bit of a conversation with Dave.
People used to kind of ask, "Oh, how's little Ted doing?" and all this sort of stuff, because I was quite open about it all the way through what was going on, because the channel didn't start until we already knew that he was poorly, and it was 3.5 years of treatment, and now he's great, and he's a little dancer and doing jazz and ballet exams and stuff. He's 7 now.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Now, as a father, I can't imagine what that had been like for you. So I lost my father to cancer back in 2017, and we were his primary carers for a while. So I know what it's like to watch a loved one go through that kind of treatment and be sick. And I know just how much love I have for my little girl. And I can't put those two things together in my head. I can't imagine what it would have been like to go through that. So you guys, that would have been tough. And it's amazing that he's come out the other end and he's all good.
The stupid thing is, I can't imagine what it would be like to go through that either, because we just did, and it was just what life is. We were. He had an NG tube, so he had a little.
So Dave, they're talking a little bit about when his son was had leukemia and how that affected him, and that he just kind of lived with it and got on with it. Unfortunately, little Ted is fine now, or is healthy, and that's great. That's wonderful. On that, just a little bit about me. I talk here and there about my family, and the man that I consider my father was a man named Graham Wendes. Graham came into my life when I was 5 years old. My biological father wasn't on the scene. My mum had left him, and I'd gone with her, and we lived a very, very poor upbringing. We were living in a 1-bedroom flat, mum sleeping on the sofa, holes in my shoes, and eating cheese sandwiches for dinner, small violin and all. But Dad lived quite a lavish lifestyle, lived in very big houses, drove Porsches and Range Rovers. So I grew up very poor and went without. And he did not go without. In fact, it was my birthday this week, and the man didn't even text me. So we don't have a very close relationship, because I was raised by Graham, and Graham is the father figure in my life. And he sadly passed away in 2017 after esophageal cancer, and we'd looked after him. He lived with us, and we were primary carers for quite some time. So it was a tough time, and it's hard to be a father and knowing that my little girl's never going to meet Grandad Graham, and that my biological father is still around and will occasionally see my little girl. And it saddens me that she's never going to know Graham and Grandad Graham, because he would have been amazing with her. And I just need to make sure. I know I've got pictures of him up in my office. There's pictures of Graham up over here, and he's the reason that I am the person I am today. He was the only person in the world that had ever, in my opinion, demonstrated true altruism. He helped people for the sake of helping people. Never wanted any thanks. Didn't matter how much it cost. If he could help someone, he would. And a little bit of that has stemmed over into my person, which is why we do a lot of outreach work, and we're raising money to feed kids from poor backgrounds. We're offering mentorship and doing all of the work I do with young people, as well as working in film and television and all of the exciting things I do and professional acrobatics. But really, the mentorship and the not-for-profit that we set up a couple of years ago is what I'm most passionate about at the moment. So yeah, that's a little bit of an aside. When I talk about my father and I talk about Graham is a wonderful person. And when I talk about my biological father, my dad, who, in my opinion, is not such a great person. And yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. And finally, getting on to the last guest we had. And this is Jamie. Jamie is an old friend. We've known each other for 20 odd years. And I didn't realize that I had quite the impact on him that I did. He went and lived and worked and studied, in fact, I think 3-4 years of university in United States, because I spoke to him about my experience working in the States after I'd worked out there for 3 years. And he went and did that. And that was, one of the parts of his life that then set him on the path that he's on now. And Jamie's one of the nicest people you could ever meet, like absolute heart of gold, really, really lovely guy. And so natural at working with young people. He worked for us for a little while, working on our summer camps, and he's just a really, really lovely guy. And at Christmas last year, he tried to raise some money for charity, and he was making these videos, and these videos were brilliant. They were just the creativity, and he was tackling and wrestling himself and fighting with himself. It's just really, really good videos. And I wanted to get him on to talk about just his life and what he's all about. And he was resistant because he didn't think that he was interesting enough to warrant being on a podcast. It was one of my favorite conversations. And now he kind of wants to come back on the show. And I think maybe we'll do like a guest slot, and maybe we'll just do like maybe a half an hour just chatting about stuff, because he's a great talker. He's an intelligent guy. He's really lovely, but he's engaging. So here's a little bit of Jamie. Jamie Veg Hammond, who's got some really interesting stories to tell. And the first thing I noticed about Jamie is that he does have his entire beard. Now, Jamie, before we jump back in time, could you tell us why you having a full beard is important?
Well, this whole social media campaign came about last year in December. I was raising money for the hospital that looked after my brother who had leukemia. And they fixed him, which was good because I wasn't going to do any kind of fundraising until he was fully healed. The fundraiser was people could donate money, and for every £5 that you donated, you had a vote towards what type of beard I would have over Christmas. And for those that don't know, over Christmas, you've got my birthday, you've got New Year's Day. I was working during that period, so there was a lot of opportunities for people to mess with me, and I expected it to be something silly like, oh, you've got to have a regular moustache, or like you were going for the general, I believe, which is across and down and curved up. Would have been great. But in the end, one of my best friends managed to orchestrate a campaign to get me to have exactly half a beard. So
there we go. Jamie talking about his half beard there, which was a sight to behold. There's some pictures up on his social media, and if you watch Jamie's episode on YouTube, you'll be able to see it there. And Jamie was just the loveliest guy. And actually, it's really connected Jamie and myself. So after he'd raised some money for St. Bart's, who looked after his brother, we kind of reconnected. We hadn't spoken in a few years, not really outside of the occasional social media message. And on his birthday, we went over to his family's house and we had some food. And I said I really wanted to spend more time with him because he is a lovely guy, and then kind of got him onto the podcast. I'd said I wanted to see him in January, and it was March before we hung out. But we're now texting quite regularly, and he's going to come and hang out next Wednesday. So I'm really excited to have a bit more Jamie in my life. And I think that having Jamie around a little bit more maybe might get him to do some more creativity. No, it's not my place to tell him what to do with his life at all. He's a great photographer. He's a great filmmaker. And if he could be a little bit more creative, then I'd love to see that, selfishly. And now I thought this episode was going to be half an hour. I thought me talking about and breaking down, the pros and cons of the podcast was going to be half an hour, and we're already over 50 minutes, because I did want to talk a little bit about, my background and who the hell am I to be talking to these people and trying to give anyone advice on what it is to be successful. Am I even successful? So the bottom line was that I was a gymnast as a child, doing performance gymnastics, arena gymnastics. I wanted to be involved in film and television. I wanted to be a stuntman. And I got involved in film and television, and I did stunt courses and stage combat courses. My gymnastics really helped with that. I went traveling around the States. I worked in upstate New York. 2001, I was there for 9/11 and came back on the 16th of September from New York. I went out 2002, 2003. I did scuba diving qualifications and just took, like I said, all those opportunities. Hey, do you want to come scuba diving West Palm Beach for a week? Yes, I do. So I did my advanced open water. I did technical diving. We did some marine biology modules. Fascinating. Absolutely loved it. And I kind of get that slight hyper focus with things. Got involved in photography. Love photography, which is the reason I've got the cameras that I can do the podcast with. I couldn't do the in-person podcast with, an iPhone or an iPad. Well, I could, but it wouldn't be great. So I kind of go in with both feet on these things. Then I kind of drifted and floundered for a bit. I got a little bit involved in skateboarding, which is how Jamie and I became friends. And we were going around having adventures, but I was kind of coasting through life, 21, 22, and then found parkour. Some guys training in the park, just jumping around, and I went and joined them. Took them to gymnastic gyms. They took me to the city. I was a little bit older than them, by a couple of years, so became something of a leader or in that circle because I was a little bit older. Not that I was particularly more experienced, but I had a lot of gymnastic background, so I knew how to jump and land and flip and these kind of things. And then started taking auditions and castings. And in 2007, we did Britain's Got Talent, which we got through to the semi-finals of as the free runners. That opened a lot of doors. And then there was the economic crash, 2008, 2009. So I got involved in teaching. And I now have my own academy. It's the office we're in now. It's where we shot Jamie's interview there, which is why it's echoey. That was in the studio at the academy. And we run a full-time thing, employing 12 people, some of whom you can probably hear now as they're just starting to come in for their class. And I've got a little girl, and that's it. So I've traveled the world. I've worked for massive brands. I've worked for big corporates. I've worked for the English National Opera for the last 14 years doing their fights and falls. I've done sword play. We've done unarmed combat. We've done high falls. And it's been amazing. Absolutely been amazing. I've performed and choreographed all over the world, and I've got countless stories to tell. And that really brings me onto the podcast, because I'm thinking I'm a fairly normal person who's done loads of really interesting things. I want to listen to other people's stories. Let's sit down and have a chat. That's why I'm trying to get quite normal people on my podcast. I might occasionally dabble into someone a little bit bigger, but I want interesting people on the podcast that can share their stories with an audience of 62 subscribers. So that's where we're at. And that's going to bring us to the end of this episode. So if you're interested in anything specific, like you want to hear something, you want to see something, let me down in the comments. If you have watched this far, thank you. Don't forget to like and subscribe. But really engage with me. Let me know what's going on, what you want to see. Do you want guests to come back? Do you want them to tell a bit more of a story on a particular thing they touched upon in their episode? Do you want to hear more about me and some of my stories? Let me know. Well, thanks a lot for listening this far, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.